Welcome back to the Golf Ophthalmology Breakdown. My name is Chris No Bridge, aka Chris Nasty. On today's show, we break down last week's winners from the Wyndham Championship, as well as doing a little preview show for this week's event at the St. Jude Classic. So before we move on, let's give you a heads up. I'm planning to make this show now on Wednesdays, just so I can combine both seeing this week's slate as well as looking back at last week's events. We'll see how this works out. If you guys prefer where we just go over last week's events right away, I can do that, but just go ahead and leave some comments in the comment section or let me know on Twitter what you think works best, and I'm happy to make the show work best for you. All right, so let's look back at last week's events. All right. After getting a quad on the first hole of the event, Jun Yoon Kim / Tom Kim comes back and wins, running away with it. And he did so also in DraftKings points. You see here he scored 145.5 points. Even though he was owned at 20%, he obviously was a necessary play. I think one thing I want to talk about is looking at, even though ownership may sometimes have to force you to make decisions on cutting people, you sometimes have to kind of eat the chalk and go play from there. You can see here that Sung Jae Im was owned by 23%, Russell Henley 21%, even Davis Riley at 10%, still a fair amount. You could have eaten Will Salvatore's chalk at 18% and still done well, even if you had him there instead of Sung Jae Im. So I want to go over a few things here first. Let's look at the finishing position and their actual points on DK. So a couple highlights here. Davis Riley finished 13th in the event, but 9th in DK points. Even more impressive is Doug Redman, who I'm pretty sure had a hole-in-one. So he finished in 21st in the actual tournament, but finished 11th in DraftKings points. So you can see here that DraftKings points is not purely based off of where you finish. It's about getting birdie streaks, bogey-free rounds, minimizing mistakes, but making it all up with lots of birdies. On the other end of that spectrum, Tyrrell Hatton, who finished 8th in the event, but actually finished 20th in DraftKings points. So you could have avoided him and still been fine, even though he was at 10%. One thing you'll see here, there's a couple guys who were really minimally owned. I'll be honest, I follow as much golf as anyone, and I'd never heard of Ben Griffin, who projected at 1%, was owned by about 1%. So if you had him, congratulations. I don't know how you got there, but good on you. So let's now go ahead and take a look at the optimal lineup from last week. So a couple things to highlight here first. We had Tom Kim, Sung Jae Im, John Huh, Taylor Moore, Ben Griffin, and Russell Henley. Also, it was great to see Taylor Moore put up another good week. I'm pretty sure he was either in the optimal last week or in the top 10. So that was impressive to see. One little clarification here. You see Russell Henley at 9,800, scoring 101 points. He actually tied with, where is it here, with Max McGreevy at 6,000. So you could also have had Max McGreevy there and left yourself with a lot more money left over. But for the sake of most people not having Max in their lineups, clearly I put 0%. It was more like 0.3% in most of the events. So it wasn't necessarily a reasonable play that people used. But having Russell Henley here, you still would have had a unique lineup because no one had this lineup. Even though he was at 21%, you can see for a combined ownership of 72% between Tom Kim, Sung Jae, and Russell, that ate up, almost 85% of the ownership right there. But even Taylor Moore was a reasonable play. I mean, he'd been playing well leading up to this event. John Huh did not have much of a history here, so this was a pretty big surprise, especially because he was coming off with 3 or 4 missed straight cuts. Ben Griffin really not doing anything this year. So as you can see, you had a couple unique plays along with 3 big chalky plays. But now let's go ahead and see how this was actually used compared to other lineups. So first, let's go into the big boy, the $20, $150 max $1 million event, where $250,000 was for first place, and DJC 589185 put together this incredible lineup, left 200 left over here. So of the optimal players, he had 4 of them. He had Sung Jae, Russell, John Huh, and Tom Kim, added Alex Smalley and Ryan Moore. You can see from ownership, Smalley was relatively owned at 8%. Ryan Moore, more unique play. He's been kind of hot and cold this year. He's either finishing in the top 15 or missing cuts this year. So he snuck in here. I'm assuming this guy had multiple, more than 30 lineups put together and was able to put together 669 points. But you can see, even though this great lineup was here, had 4 of the guys in the optimal lineup, to get to the optimal, you could still get scored 60 more points if you were to switch those out for Ben Griffin and Taylor Moore here. On to the next one, another big boy event, the $5 150 max, $350K with $50K up top. had, again, 4 players from the optimal. This one had Sungjae, Tom Kim, Taylor Moore, and John Ha. So did not have Russell Henley like he had in the lineup up here. But this one rounded out with Taylor Pendleton and Keith Mitchell. Another great thing here is he had 2 more guys who were relatively owned. I mean, 13, 14%, still pretty impressive to be owned by that many people and have a unique lineup. But leaving 400 on the table and having John Ha here was clearly what the difference maker for him to get the 663 points. Now, also, we can compare that to the single entry and the smaller entry events. So 645 points here for a 3-entry event, whereas we got up to 663 points for the 150 max. So you can see you don't need to have near the amount of points to take down one of these events because you've only got 1 shot. But you can still see you can still put together a good lineup here. So you got Sungjae Im, Tom Kim, Taylor Moore, JT Poston, Davis Riley, and Callum Tarrant. All with decent ownership. I mean, Taylor Moore, again, was the lowest owned, but he was still coming off another good week, so it wasn't like he was a surprise play. Davis Riley's been playing well. By and large, for most of the year, last week, I believe he missed a cut. So this is still an impressive win here, and his lineup here went 10, 8, 8, 8, 7, 7. We'll talk about the exact builds here in just a minute, but you can see he went with 3 ace, so a pretty aggressive balance build, no 6K players, only left $100 left over. But again, having Tom Kim, Sungjae, and Taylor Moore, 3 of the guys in the optimal, was able to take it down. I believe this one was a $10,000 first place, so good on you, Tryman39. And the next event here, I wanted to show a 3-max event. So in this 3-max event, we had Hennessy 33 take this one down. Only had 2 players in the optimal, and that was just Tom Kim and Sungjae Im. Also rounded out with Adam Scott, Alex Smalley, who we saw earlier in the 150 max win, Callum Tarrant, who was in the prior lineup here in the single entry, and Cheston Hadley. Cheston has been on a good little run here. He's stuck from outside the top 125 and now in the playoffs this week. So obviously at 4% owned on the lower end, but definitely a guy who plays well in the Southeast, Wyndham in Sedgefield, North Carolina. So good for him to getting into that lineup. This one was a 10-9-8-7-7-6. Now this is actually pretty close to what the optimal was here. So the optimal here had I apologize for not being in order here, but he had a 10-9-8-7-6-6. So he had 2 6K guys, whereas this one here had 1 6K, but it still went 10-9-8 with a 7-7-6 lineup, 0 left over. Only 599 points, was able to take it down. So good for him. I believe this was a smaller payout, like a $1,500 payout. But for a 3-max event for only $8, it's a great ROI, obviously. And then last but not least, the Bear Squad Brian. This was the 20 max. So I wanted to kind of show you what kind of builds are necessary to win when you look at the size of the amount of entries. So if you have 150 max, you're going to have players who are able to take more chances, accrue more points. You can see here the 669, the 663. And then the 20 max actually gets pretty close. This guy was able to put together 652 points, had Tom Kim, Sungjae Im, Taylor Moore, and then had Davis Riley, Scott Scollings, and Ches Reavy. All that put together gave him a nice little 10K payday as well. Now what I want to kind of show you is, if you were somehow able to get Ben Griffin, John Ha in your lineups, congratulations. But I wanted to find a lineup that had more owned players that would have been unique and still taking down a lot of the events. So here we got Sungjae Im, Russell Henley, Tom Kim, and Taylor Moore. Again, all plays were totally reasonable. Taylor Moore playing well. Cheston Hadley from the Southeast. Brandon Wu had come back from a couple of top 20s in the last couple of events. So even though he's only 2% owned, that could have been a good leverage play because had you put him in there, along with this lineup, he would have 673 points, which, again, would have won everything, including the 250K event here that DJC broke through in. But, again, in order to win, you had to have at least 3 or 4 of these, the optimal plays, which in this case was Sungjae Im, Russell Henley, Tom Kim, and Taylor Moore. Do want to go over a few things here. So as we saw, the optimal build had the 10-9-8-7-6-6. I wanted to compare this to a couple other options here. Give me 1 second as I rotate this. All right. So now these are optimal lineups across the whole year. So that lineup this week was as you can see here, a 10-9-8-7-6-6. When we look at our running tally for the year, the 10-9-8-7-6 766 has been the optimal lineup 8 times. The most common one, of course, is the 10-9-8. 776, which was used for one of the other winners from last week. But you can see here that's a relatively commonly used winner. There's also some more unique options here with the 10-10 lineups and also a bunch of these that are no 10K lineups. But on here you can see the 10-9-8, 766 been there 8 times. The winner here, this lineup started with a 10K lineup, which is pretty common. As you can see, 62% of the 177 optimal lineups I've been tracking start with a 10K lineup. It kind of is surprising that we have this many that don't have a 10K player in there. But nothing to look at here. The winner was an AK player in Tom Kim, which again now gets us back to right here. So the price of the winner in the AK range was 17%. And then you can see for what types of what are the amounts of happening for optimal players. 10's in there 11% of the time, a 9K players in there 14% of the time, and on down. Also, there's a lot more of the slate that play in the 7 and 6K range, so you're gonna have a lot more of them in there. So over half of the lineups have 6 and 7K players. All right, and you can kind of see across. This is the first time that an AK player has wanted to say Jude. So these were just like the builds of them. So back in 2017. We had a 988-766 with 2,400 left over. But since then, in 2018, 19, 20, and 21, you can see that the amount left over is a lot less. All right, let's move over to the St. Jude Classic here. All right, so let's first take a look at prior optimals. So last year in 2021, Abraham Answer won. But you can see the build here was pretty balanced. He had 2 9s, 2 8s, a 7, and a 6, leaving 600 left over with Hideki Matsuyama, Paul Casey, Cam Smith, Harris English, Sam Burns. Obviously, some of these guys didn't play this year because they've since moved on. Answer, Matsuyama is supposed to be going soon. Cam Smith, all the talk this week that he's going to be leaving as well. Doesn't sound like Sam Burns is going to. That's great. He's a great up-and-coming pro. We're going to keep him around. But you can see here, so this build is a relatively balanced one. But this specific build is actually pretty unique. It's only happened, I think, twice total. So having the 2 9s, 2 8s, a 7, and a 6. When you're going to have an 8K winner, you're going to want to try to build a more balanced version. Like obviously the most common build, if you're going to have a 10K winner, it's going to be that 10 9 8 7 6 6 build. But if you're going to look for a player in the 8K range, depending on where you find the strength is, that's kind of how you want to make your builds for that type of lineup. And you can see here just from the top 10 in points, we had one player, this is for 2021, one player who in the 10Ks who played, made the top 10, who was DJ, but also he had 10th place and 10,000, wasn't going to make the top 6 for the optimal. We had 4 guys in the 9K range, 2 in the 8K, 2 in the 7, and only 1 from the 6K range. Now, I think something we have to kind of remember for this week specifically is this event for the last 3 years has been played at the TPC Southwind. And the last 3 years that was played at the TPC Southwind was a WGC event. Now, when you're looking at a WGC field, it's a no-cut event. It's usually around 70 players who are in that field. So it's a little different than this year. So in all 3 of these cases, these are very more top-heavy events, much stronger strength of schedule events as well. Even looking back at 2020, we had 1 guy in the 10K and 5 in the 9K. This is relatively unique for most events. Usually you find, 1 or 2 guys, one guy from 10K, 1 or 2 from 9K, 2 from 8, a couple from 7, and a few more from 6. So this one had 0 guys from the 7K range to make the top 10 builds, but 5 in the 9K range. And again, in 2019, so this was the first year it was a WGC. Again, 5 players from the 10K range. I don't believe I've ever seen that at any other event, but we had Rory, Rom, Fleetwood, DJ, and of course the winner who was Koepka that year. Now what happens is when you have this many guys who are in the 10K plus range, you're going to have some other way to balance off to keep the optimal 6. You can't have 3 guys in the 10K range unless you have a bunch of flat 6 players, but even then you're not going to be able to build a team in under $50,000. So in this case, when we look at the optimal, you can see here we got 5 10K players. The optimal in 2019 was a 10-8 and then 4 7s, and that's still about $400 left over. So when we look back to that year, so you can see that Leishman, Fitzpatrick, Bubba, Coulter, those are the 7K guys that all got into that lineup along with Webb at 8. So a lot of this is kind of how you project to see those guys at the top playing. If you think you're going to have an event where you're going to have a bunch of guys in the 10K range get in, you've got to kind of have to take a stand, decide who you like most at that 10K range, and then try to balance off with a bunch of 7Ks and round it out in that direction. I'll talk about how I see the slate this week in just a few minutes here, but this is still something I think is quite likely to happen again because the guys at the top are playing well, and obviously this being the first event of the playoffs, have all the incentive to play well this week. Now, if we go back to the 2 years prior, both of these were St. Jude Classic events that were full field events, but that did not have a WGC noted with it. So these were events with cuts, and you can see the difference in the amount of folks that got in. So in this case, only one guy, 9K above, got through. We saw here 5. We saw in 2020, 6 guys from 9K and above get through the top 10. In this case, only one. Now, it was the one you had to have. DJ won that year. No other 9K players made it up there, but you can see a bunch of 7Ks and a couple of 6Ks. So when 70% of the top 10 come from 7K or below, you have to pick the winner and round out with the best decisions from that range. The year before that, in 2017, again, we had a 9K player win that week. This is also a more balanced distribution. We had 2 guys from the 9, 2 from the 8s, 2 from the 7s, 2 from the 6. This is a pretty classic build of how that event's going to break down. Again, these are full field, 144 players. Kind of sad to see some of these names who we no longer see anymore, like Braden Thornberry, Lee Kim. I think his name is not even on Thornberry anymore. Charles Schwartz, of course, back on Live. But there are some names here that I want to look at for this year. Trey Mullinex, Andrew Putnam, Chris Kirk. Berger would have been a great choice if he was playing. Who actually won the event back in 2016 before DraftKings had an event put out for this. But Berger had won back-to-back years and had 2 more top 10s in the years after that. So it was too bad for him not being able to be healthy enough to play this week. Let's go down just a little bit here on what actually made the optimals there. So in 2020, we had a 10-9-9-8-6-6. This is actually a build I think is going to be close to what happens this week when we look at the slate itself. But there's so many good players at 9K and above who are playing well. We've had some decent course history. So this to me is going to be kind of the strong zone. And this is a type of build I'm going to look forward to, so long as we can mark a couple of confident plays in the 6K range. Now, in this case, there's no 7K players. It's not a usual way of building, but depending on how you feel about this week's event, that may be a way to go. Because this week it's a little bit of a hybrid. Instead of it's not going to be a WGC 70-man field or a full field 145. It's going to be 120 players with a cut, but also all players who are playing at their best who have made it into the playoffs. So I feel like it's going to be some version of a hybrid between this 2020 and this 2019 lineup where we have a bunch of 9K and 10K players all making the optimal. All right, so going back to 2018, DJ winning was the 10K with 88776. And in 2017, because there were no 10K players that finished well up top in the winner at 9K, there were a lot of guys in the 9, 8, 7s, even the 6s who got up there and left a lot left over. Obviously, this is not necessarily how you want to build most of your lineups because you're leaving a lot of value by leaving that much on the table. I do think there's a argument to be made on specific events where this is the case. This is kind of the approach you want to take, and leaving over 1,000. But for this week, with the field being this strong, this is not the direction I would go. All right, so this is kind of a rough little Excel chart I made with kind of took over from Fantasy National. So we have some stats here for the strokes gained per average for all these players in the last 36. And then I added on the last 5 years of them playing, if they played at the St. Jude Pacific. If you look at some course history stats, they may be linked to the Northern Trust. So be careful if you're using Fantasy National, that you're looking specifically at the event played at St. Jude. So as you can see here, when Rory played, he's finished 12th, 47th, and 4th. Scheffler 12 and 15. So this is what these numbers mean over here. I also have my projected ownership here. Something I've been kind of tracking kind of more recently is seeing what ranges does chalk actually come through and where is it hurting the most. And by and large, when you're at the 8K and up, a lot of the chalk has been good chalk. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that do the research and they're finding the right place and they're going through. Like last week, we saw Tom Kim get to 20%, Sungjae Im 23%, and Russell Henley at 20%. So 3 guys all at that 8K and above range who all hit and were in the optimal. So you shouldn't feel like you have to swerve away from the chalk at the top because by and large, a lot of you play well. Now, this week with so many guys at the 10K range and above, there might be some decision time for how you want to play. As you can see here, I highlighted some of the greens, the guys in green are the guys I highlighted who I think are going to play best. Can't leave me my favorite play at 11%. It looks like I'm trying to switch just because of ownership. I actually don't. I like Cantley the most out of this range before even looking at what the projected ownership would be. Having said that, it would not surprise me seeing Scotty Scheffler and Rory coming through and playing well. I'm someone who doesn't want to pick up or at least be heavy on players who have not played stateside since the British Open. So guys like Patrick Cantley, Matt Fitzpatrick, Zalatoris, Cam Young, who have come over and at least played one event stateside to shake off the rust before this week's playoff event. Having said that, Rory and Scheffler are too stinking good to not consider, and they can win regardless. Specifically, look at when Rory finished fourth this year. The event was played just after, I believe it was the Memorial. It was in a different part of the calendar, so he actually had American golf before he played this and finished fourth. And the last 2 years, he did come after the British Open. So when you're looking at trying to figure out, okay, is he worth playing at 18%? If you're going to take a 10K plus player at 18%, you essentially need him to finish in the top three, at least in DK points for it to pay off. And for me, I'm not 100% sure I'm going to go really heavy in taking him because if he finishes 8th, 9th, and 10th, I'm not sure that it's going to pay off. Whereas if you have a guy who's at 10-3, it's much more likely where he can finish in 7th and 8th and still pay off as opposed to Rory and Scheffler at that 11K price tag. Now, as you can see here, he hasn't had great success. And if you think about it, the 12th, 35th, and 23rd really isn't that impressive when this is out of 70 players in a no-cut event. So while this does not signify too much of him having great success at this course, he's been too hot leading up to this event. And I think he's going to continue and at least finish in the top five. Not saying he's going to win, but I'm pretty confident that he's going to finish in the top five this week. You go down the slate here, you can see most of these guys in this range are going to be at least 10 to 12, 15% owned. The only guy I think is going to be really highly owned that I'm going to stay away from specifically because of ownership is Tony Finau. I mean, if you really think the guy's going to win 3 straight events, go for it. Not going to be my play. Hasn't had great success here. Missed cut when it was a full field event, 27. This is 65 out of 70, so clearly not impressed there. 34th here, so he hasn't done anything to really show me that he's going to do well, other than the fact that he's been so hot leading up to this event. Will Zalatoris is going to get a lot of talk this week for good reason. The guy's a stud. This course is tough. He plays tough course as well. Finished 8th here in his first try. I guess my only concern is his change in caddy, which take the narrative any way you want to. Guys can change caddies, win right away. Other times, there's a feeling out period if this is the right fit. I've heard some talk that he's going to be taking over a caddy from another player, specifically Jim Edmondson from Ryan Palmer. Having said that, until he's got that cleared up, I'm still going to use some of him. I'm not going to go overweight with him, but that's a play that I think is viable. The guy I really am going to probably go heavy on is Cam Young. Again, he's hot, back-to-back second-place finishes, plays well at tough tracks. It's a ball striker's paradise. It's a course where you have to put in the fairway, hit it far, and then the greens are so pure that he's got a great stroking forward as well. Last week we saw Tom Kim come out and break through for victory at a young, crazy young age. I think we go back-to-back with Cam Young, another young guy, another young stud. So let's see if that can go through. As you can see here, I've not highlighted very many players in the 8K range. To me, it's just kind of I'm not going to say it's a dead zone. There's a lot of great players here. But for one reason or another, I just don't like who's here. So, Hideki Matsuyama finished great, just withdrew. Goodbye. Shane Lowry has had good history here in 6th place a couple of years ago. Still don't feel like his game is right where it needs to be. He just seems like he's one place off in every event. Horschel is definitely someone I'd have to consider. 4th in the full field, 9th in the WGC, playing great. Memphis is essentially the South, and he loves to play in the Southeast courses. So I can see him getting through. Neiman's been a little weak recently, not great course history. Sam Burns, man, I know that he's going to be a position. I'm taking the strong position here that I just don't think he's going to have it for this week. I'll wait for next week, and I think he'll be. I'm hoping he plays tanks, and then next week I can scoop him up at a lower ownership. But I put him at 14%. This actually may get up to 17 or 18. Sungjae Im, been playing hot, Doesn't have a great history here. I'm hoping that suppresses ownership just a little bit. But I feel like he's shown that he can play well in 3 or 4. He can go in little 3 or 4 week stretches. So we've had back-to-back second place finishes. I think he can kind of come through. And again, I don't need him to finish second. Finish 8th or 10th and get some extra points and get into that optimal. That's kind of what I'm feeling here. And now let's break down into the 7K range. Some strong players here. One guy that also you can see he's got great owner. He's going to have high ownership is Russell Henley. Now, a little tricky thing here is he hasn't played in the last 4 years and a missed cut in 2017, but he actually has 2 top 10 finishes prior to that. So this tells me a couple things. One, he has played well here. He knows the course well enough to have had good finishes, but the fact that he hasn't played recently for a guy at his stature who has options and could play here if he wanted to and chose not to, makes you think that it's not necessarily his favorite course, even though everything lines up. I mean, he is just putting the ball in the fairway, putting everything on the green, and not making very many putts, but we know that his putter can get hot. It wouldn't surprise me to see him play well here and finish in the top 10. I wouldn't go overboard in ownership. This kind of scares him that he hasn't been playing it recently, but he has the game for it. It's the right type of course. You don't have to overpower it. It's not a distance course. It's more of a get the ball in play and execute around the greens. Tyrrell Hatton at the exact same price has again had back-to-back top 25s the last couple of weeks. Has played the event a couple of times, 43rd and 17th, nothing amazing there. But just seems like he's kind of rounding into shape, and his course form is almost always better on regular events where he tends to underperform in majors. So I think this is a good pivot position away from the Henley chalk if you don't feel like beating it up there. There is at this point not many players hitting the ball better than Taylor Pendrith. And if he's going to be at 5%, that's an automatic play. It's 7,600. I don't care that he hasn't played the course. The reasons pure as they are, he doesn't have to putt amazing. He can keep putting the ball at 15 feet, make a third of them, and win the event. So that's the guy I like at that range here. Chris Kirk, also hitting the ball very well. 6th place in 2018, I believe that is. Kind of quiet, a little on the radar at 8%. Nothing too crazy here. It seems like to me when I looked at the last couple of weeks, players who are in that 7 to 10% range have been performing quite well when you project that and get that into who you think is going to perform that well that week. Keith Mitchell, another guy who is a pure ball striker, 5% ownership, has seen the course, living amazing, but another guy that I'm going to keep my eyes on and most likely have in a couple of my lineups this week. Scroll down a bit, Scott Stallings, been crazy hot, hitting the ball great, and shows in his ownership at 13 to 14%. So while I love to play him, depending on how many lineups I end up building, I may limit and just have maybe 1 or 2 as a hedge. But really, I'm probably not going to go overboard and try to mash the field at this point. Adam Long also finished 24th here a few years ago. Hasn't really had a great end of season, but a guy who puts the ball in play and either finishes in the top 15 or he finishes way out of it. So if he's going to make the cut, the guy you're going to want to have in some of your lineups there. Now the 6K range. This is where we're going to have to make some decisions because if we are going to go with some kind of aggressive 10-9-9 or 10-9-8 with just 1-7, we're going to need a couple of sixes down here. So as we get down, the guys kind of screamed out to me. Number 1, Taylor Moore. I'll keep riding that train. He's had back-to-back top 8s, hitting the ball well. It's not someone who's lighting the world on fire from putting. It's more his ball striking. So if the guy continues ball striking this week, make a few putts, put himself in the top 15, he'll be someone to be worth it and pay off for his putts. Scroll down just a bit here. Merritt and Putnam. This is more kind of course history. If you're a course history junkie, also we had Putnam finished 2nd in 18, 24th. Merritt finished 12th there as well. So these are some guys you can kind of take some chances with who, if they can get the ball just in play and just get it on the green regulation, can get hot with the putter and then pay off. One guy who I'm going to take probably a big flyer on is Steven Yeager. Finished well last week. Has played this event. Obviously missed the cut in 2018, but he's a totally different player now. And I was looking at his performances from last year on the Corn Ferry. He has gone 3 weeks in a row of playing, hot golf. And we've had him now in back-to-back events. He's finished in the top 15. I'm going to take that chance again, see if we can get the ball in play, make a bunch of putts, and pay off at only 4%. And the last guy I want to talk about is Trey Mullinax, 6th place finish in 2018. Again, another guy that everyone's going to say can't putt, great ball striker. But also we know that he's got experience here, knows what to do, and knows the greens well enough and been successful. Won about a month ago, so the guy is clearly in good form. and at 4%, you can build a lineup with him here, or even with Jaeger, and now you still have a lineup where you're gonna be unique enough, even if you use up a lot of your salary to pay it off. I'll do a quick glance at some of the lineups I've built here. You can see here that I'm doing a bunch with Merritt and Mullinex. I'm still going to add some more to this, but Hendrick and Moore to let that out. I'm building most of my lineups to leave a lot less on the table than I usually do. I usually leave closer to 1,000, but for this event, I'm going to limit how much I leave over here between 0, 200, and 400. All right, and with that, I want to say thank you for those who've been watching the video. Appreciate the comments and the likes. Please keep watching them. I'm hoping some of my discussions here either wake up a new view on how to approach building lineups, and then hopefully I can start calling out your name as one of the lineups on my gross Excel sheet for taking down a big victory. Good luck, you guys. We'll see you next week, and that's it. Have a great night.